The Faith in Business Leadership Retreat is back. We will be together in Cambridge on the 20th and 21st of May 2022. Rest assured, the Cambridge Union is a large venue with lots of space. Join people of faith who are in business as we discuss the theme of investment. Dawn Smallwood, a previous attendee, is excited to be back in Cambridge for this retreat. Each time she attends, she grows spiritually and commercially. She said, to blend my faith and business life is a personal mission. Hi, I'm Camille Daly, and personally, I have attended Faith in Business virtually over the last 2 years, and I've met so many people and learned from a range of experiences, but I am excited for this opportunity to finally meet fellow Christians in business in person at the conference. Go to faithinbusiness.org and click What's On. You'll find more information about the Faith in Business retreat. Read more and book your spot. There's only a few spaces left. You can join us in person in Cambridge from the 20th to the 21st of May, or online in the afternoon of the 20th of May. It will be an inspiring and inspirational retreat incorporating the best elements of faith in business. There'll be speakers, heart talks, group discussions, all in collaboration with our friends at the Global Leadership Network. www.faithinbusiness.org. See you there.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Camille. I'm not seeing you whether you're on the call, but you're on that video. And thank you so much. You've got great charm. And thanks for putting that together. The vision behind this retreat, do you know, the best way to understand that is to subscribe to our journal. It's called Faith in Business Quarterly. And in there, the back article is on this theme of God's investment and ours. And it's just a 2-pager. So subscribe to the journal and read the last 2 pages, and you'll know everything about the retreat, the vision behind the retreat, not the content, but the vision. But let me say a few words here, and we're pushed for time because we've got a lot of very highly qualified and experienced speakers, and we want to give them a chance to give us their insights. I'm going to share with you 3 verses from the Bible. And you won't believe it, but in 3 verses, Jesus packs in 2 parables. And before I forget to make the point, that makes a point about how come our speakers give such short talks on our Faith and Business Monthly and at our events. I'm used to academic conferences which have sessions of an hour and a half, in which about 40 minutes is for the speaker and 40 minutes for Q&A. Or even longer for the speaker and less for the Q&A. And generally the speakers go on longer than they're assigned anyway. So why so short? Why only 6 minutes? Well, look at these 2, look at that first verse there, verse 44. That's 1 parable in 1 verse. And it's also a story. You can tell a story in 1 verse. And then the second 2 verses on that screen tell another parable, a bit similar, but it's another parable. Let's read them. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. This man isn't actually looking for treasure. He stumbles across it and finds it, but he's so thrilled about it, he hides it again and buys the field. I think in business, we call this asymmetric information. He's got some information about that field that the seller doesn't have. It's got treasure hidden in it. He's not going to, of course, tell the seller because that will push up the price. He wants that field because he wants the treasure. The second parable, it's not, the focus isn't like the treasure, it's on the person. And this is a business person. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. Very different from the first man. This guy's looking for treasure. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. I think this is so brilliant that Jesus tells these two stories, because that is what it's like, isn't it? To find the kingdom of heaven, to find Jesus. Some people are looking for it, and examples in scripture could include the Ethiopian eunuch and Nicodemus. They're intensely looking for the kingdom, and then they find it. And there are others, and perhaps Paul is a bit like this with his Damascus Road experience. He's not looking for Christ at all. In fact, he's off to persecute Christians. But God takes him by surprise on the road to Damascus. He suddenly comes across a pearl of great price. Sorry, he's like the man who finds it, he stumbles across it. Sorry, and Nicodemus and the Ethiopian eunuch are those who are looking for it. So there's different ways of coming into the kingdom, but they both seem to require an investment. Both, it says, both these men sold everything they had to buy it. They thought what was on offer was better than they already have. And that, I think, lies at the ground of all investments, that you can see a future that's better than your present. It's anti-consumerism. It's anti-gratify my desires now. It's the delay of gratification. That is what's required for investment. You see a future value, and you're willing then, in these cases, to sacrifice everything you have for it. And such is the call on God's life and the promise of the kingdom, that it's like that for us. Following Jesus is worth everything we have. So that's a little bit the theme behind the retreat. What is God's investment in us and in his world, and what should our response be? If you know the programs, the Dragon's Den, which in the United States, where a couple of our people are from today, it's called the Shark Tank. And if you're aware with the equally popular TV show, The Apprentice, what are those young entrepreneurs looking for? They're all looking for investment, that somebody sees a future value in departing with significant amounts of cash to put into this tiny business. Now we're going to turn to our speakers. They're going to introduce themselves, and then, like a relay, they're going to hand on from one to the other. And we start with Matt.
Yes, I am Matt in Nottingham, and have in conjunction with our local church, which is Grace Church, I run something called Grace Enterprises, which is all about employing the long-term unemployed. Grew up in Nottingham, and then the interesting part of our story for this would be that God spoke really clearly to me on a Saturday, and then on Monday morning I handed in my notice as a primary school teacher, so gave up my career effectively then after working out my notice. My wife also was a GP, and she's given that up. So definitely from an investment point of view, we are all in for running a charity, supporting people. And we employ the long-term unemployed, so ex-homeless, ex-addict, ex-offender, survivors of modern slavery, but genuinely believe the only sustainable way of doing that is through business. So deliberately setting up businesses to employ them, that's the main aim, but also to turn a profit and then reinvest it, thinking that's the way that a kingdom business could operate. And with the church, I just see it as a natural extension of giving someone a food parcel, which is what they need when they're hungry, or giving them a night shelter when they've got nowhere to sleep. But actually long term, that's not a sustainable solution. So actually employing them, paying the real living wage. So there's a piece in there about actually Christians and the church and business, and doing it in a different way, and doing it, creating wealth, but for the kingdom. And then it's a question of what you do with it. So that's what we've done. And God has been so gracious to us. Like some of the things, even the last few months, have been just crazy, and as in God's favor on us, sort of made those radical steps, and he comes through. Sometimes it's right up against the wire. Other times it's not. I mean, someone gave us £60,000 yesterday, which is just an amazing blessing for to be able to multiply it and the kingdom impact. So yeah, I'm personally genuinely really excited about the retreat. I think it's important to invest in myself as well as everyone else, so that I'm not just constantly giving out, but making that time. And I put it in my diary every month to have a day to myself, but it rarely happens. And I found that what does happen is when I've committed and paid to go somewhere and made the time and thought and said I'll do something, I find that is so helpful, refreshing, and God always honors that, the sacrifice that's involved in there, the investment. God honors it, comes through every single time. So I'm genuinely excited about being refreshed, spending time with you guys, but also the fact that I'm absolutely convinced that driving home, God will have spoken in a way that makes a tangible difference to when I'm on the way there on the Friday. So I'm looking forward to it and looking forward to seeing lots of you there. And I believe that I passed the relay baton on to Karen.
Thanks very much, Matt. I'm Karen Pybus. I'm the CEO of Ethical Apparel Africa, which is a sourcing and manufacturing business working with factories in West Africa, primarily in Ghana, modeling a new manufacturing model for the way that we do garment manufacturing that's focused on worker empowerment and reinvesting profits back into worker satisfaction to create further operational excellence in what we do. I think the question around what God's investment means to me particularly is that, I mean, at the end of the day, he created me. So, that's a pretty good start in that sense. But I think also, when I look at what I'm doing now and I can see, the benefit of hindsight and the big picture and the investment that God has made in me through my career and the different things that I've worked in and the companies that I've worked for, and the experiences that I've had, that means I couldn't be doing what I was doing now without a lot of that knowledge and experience. And I find myself drawing up from things that have happened 15 years ago and trying to find that knowledge in the back of my head that I've learned. And so he knew that. He knew what I was going to be doing now, and he knew what I needed to do to start with to be able to get to where I was doing now. And I think the other thing is that, remembering that he knows every hair on my head and that I am unique, that nobody else can do what I'm doing today in the way that I do it and the way that he's called me to do it. And so therefore I've got a responsibility to steward that skill set, that time, those resources. Like Matt, I gave up everything to start the business in terms of, not taking a salary for a number of years, etc. But how do I do that so that I am doing the best that I can do in the role that he's given me to do, because nobody else is called to do the role that I'm doing in what I'm doing. And very similar to what Matt said, I try and take time out, but actually it doesn't work when you're crazy and, I'm traveling. I'm actually only able to be at the conference on the Friday because I'm traveling to Ghana on the Saturday. It's very difficult to have that time. And so I've found particularly Faith in Business Monthly, but also the Faith in Business prayer meetings have been a point where I have to invest in my relationship with God. And those tools help me to do that. As such, I will be on the prayer team at the retreat as well. And so if anybody has got things that they're dealing with at the moment, they really need support and prayer support, there will be a prayer ministry time working with you and being able to come alongside you during that time as well. So really happy to do that, but really looking forward to also holding that accountability for my own investment in my relationship with God as well. Thank you. And I'm going to pass you on to Tim, all the way from the USA.
Thank you, Karen. Great to be with you. I am the executive editor for a relatively new organization called the Eventide Center for Faith and Investing. That in turn is a subsidiary, in effect, of a Christian mutual fund based in Boston called Eventide Asset Management. I'm not sure whether in Britain you have what are in the US called mutual funds precisely, but essentially we're a good size Christian oriented investment or asset manager. The Eventide Center is an effort to more broadly disseminate what we think is a biblical understanding of God's intent for both business and investing. My own thoughts for today sort of flash back to the fact that a week or so ago, I was involved in an event at Gordon Conwell Seminary north of Boston, where Peter is actually at the current time a visiting fellow of the Mockler Center there. And at an event that I was participating in for the Mockler Center, I got asked this question, which I thought it might be interesting to share my answer with you as well. The question was, what are the myths that Christians tend to embrace as it relates to investing? And so I focused on two. I said, here are what I think are the two big myths that Christians believe about investing. First, most Christians believe erroneously that they earn their returns from, quote, the market. In other words, they believe that the market somehow magically rewards investors by making their invested money grow. This is entirely false. The market on its own delivers zero returns to investors. Mutual funds on their own deliver zero returns to investors. Every penny earned by investors comes from the business activities of the underlying companies in which they are invested. Company profits, both immediate profits and the expectation of future profits, are the only source of investor returns, period. That's myth number one. Myth number two follows sort of an obvious connection. And that is that all, again, these are myths that Christians believe, that all businesses are more or less equivalent. They all want to earn profits, and they go about doing that in morally equivalent ways. So it doesn't really matter which particular companies we invest in. Wrong. Some companies have as an ultimate purpose some particular means by which they make the world better for people and or planet. These businesses enlarge human flourishing. Other companies make profit their ultimate purpose. As a result, they are willing to take advantage of, in other words, exploit various stakeholders in service to their profit objective. These businesses work at cross purposes to God's good work in the world. Instead, they reflect the steal and kill and destroy agenda of his enemy. Let me name a few. Fast fashion companies whose suppliers employ child and slave laborers and who employ their workers in radically unsafe conditions. Witness the fire in Bangladesh a few years back that killed over 1,000 workers who had been locked inside their factory building. Oil companies like BP, who practice unsafe deep water drilling and suffer catastrophic blowouts like Deepwater Horizon that cost 11 workers their lives and was the worst environmental disaster in US history. Or payday loan companies whose very business model is calibrated to ensnare the poor in endless cascading debt and devastation. Christian investors must learn to see the watershed difference between these two different business models and stop funneling money to business models that are exploiting the very people God is intent on rescuing. So something for everybody to reflect on. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Tim. And it's been interesting hearing everybody's story. My name is Ben Nick, and I've spent most of my career working at Deloitte & Touche doing transaction services, so primarily serving private equity buyers and corporate buyers in the leveraged buyout markets in the United States. I was based for most of that time, most of my career in New York City, but I recently relocated to Minnesota, which is in the center of the US. You know, I look at God's investment in my life really started in New York City, where I converted to Christianity and shortly thereafter went to seminary. Spent 3 years in seminary and came back to New York and met a group that was formed through the Center for Faith and Work through Redeemer Presbyterian Church. They had a group of finance professionals that would gather to do discipleship training, helping people work through a theology of work that applied to their work in finance. And then would do retreats similar to the one that some of us are going to attend in a few weeks here. During that time, I saw my studies in theology really get married up with my work in business. And I turned from being someone who was very cynical about business to seeing how God could work through that space for justice and for the flourishing of all peoples. And so I quickly started to study that topic and to look into it further. Eventually started teaching the class of the young finance professionals. And then spoke with my folks at Deloitte and said I wanted to work part-time in order to look into these matters further, really to understand the story of how did Christians kind of walk away from offering up their work in finance and in all other lines of work, offering that up to Christ, to focusing primarily, like Tim was saying, on increasing our personal wealth. So at present, I've been on this journey of discovery, trying to really understand what is a Christian theology of finance. And so it's a lot of the same kind of things that Tim's looking at, and also Peter. Right now I'm looking at different approaches to the ethics of finance, and getting ready to do a PhD on the topic. I'm hoping to contribute back into the Christian community that invested so much in me by working with professionals in the space to help them understand their work a little bit more. For the retreat, I'm really excited to hear from everybody else's opinions on how to approach their work and their investment. I think there's just so many big questions that we're all facing in this space, and also to making some friendships. So I'll pass it back to Peter at this point.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, all of you. You're absolutely brimming with ideas, and this is just where we want you to be with the retreat, now so close. So thank you very much. So now we're going to open it up to everyone. If you'd like to put your hand up and ask a question, or if you'd like to put it in chat, we're able to take either. So we'll have a time of open Q&A before we go into breakout groups. Just unmute yourself before you ask a question.
Robert, it looked like you had a question.
Ben, what was that?
It looked like you had a question. Did you raise your hand? I sat down below.
I have raised my hand, yeah. I'd like to ask Matt this particular question. I guess it applies to anybody else on the panel too. I love this idea of investing in the marginalized and finding grace to include people who would normally be overlooked. And I think that's exactly what the kingdom's all about. But obviously, those kind of investments is quite risky, just like other investments are. A lot of things can go wrong. So, Matt, how do you navigate and the risk of working with people who have a difficult background, who may struggle to behave, to be disciplined in the way that they might otherwise, other people might find a lot easier?
Yeah, you're totally right. At the end of the day, like, our local paper says that we employ the unemployable. So even if I would argue with the unemployable bit, genuinely no one else is employing them. So they are pretty hard to employ. But yeah, I do feel like it is, Jesus has come for the least, the last, and the lonely. And if we as the church can't step up and do something there, more than just giving a handout, and believe totally in the power of prayer, but I want to see us do actions as well, and back it up Monday to Friday, as well as praying for people. So, and it feels to me like that's the kind of thing that the church used to do a couple of 100 years ago, and then has sort of taken a step back from over time. I love Richard Higginson's book, A Voice to Be Heard, which talks about that. And so that's part of, I suppose, the inspiration for me, and seeing what used to be like. And also in our journey was going to Kenya and seeing churches there that were far more active than in this country. And that again was sort of inspiring. But yeah, I mean, we do employ people that others say it will not work. I'm told all the time what you're doing is impossible, but which is fine, because I'd say, well, they'll see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. It makes it an interesting conversation with non-believers, because they say it's not possible, then it works. It's like, well, you're really lucky or really good. And I'd be like, well, it's neither. It's to do with God. A shortish version of how we do it would be, if this little Lego wall represents our team, then if the small white bricks are the ones where I gave up my job for, the person who is genuinely been homeless, addicted, whatever the issue will have been, then I think they are the reason why I'm not teaching now. But I think it's like unfair to take those people. I think you can build a business with them, but not on them. And I don't even think it'd be fair to try it. And I think what people have done before is to try with loads of those people. They're all ex-addicts, they're all ex-homeless, they're all something. They're very, very social. They're not very businessy. They can't deliver. It falls over. It doesn't work. There's no strength. I would argue quite strongly that it's the other bits, the other people in that bricks, the other bricks rather in that wall that hold it together. So that white brick in the middle is just as strong as any other part of that wall, but it's because of those around it. So, and I think that's what the church should look like anyway. It shouldn't be, here's a church for ex-addicts, here's a church for ex-offenders. I think personally that like the church looks the best when it's a diverse group of people, rich, poor, every different background, etc. And so even if I think we could get all of them to be ex-homeless, I'd probably choose to mix it up. And I just think that's how ultimately we deliver, along with God's grace, because there's so many times that things might have gone wrong or might not, but genuinely believing that God has got our back and putting ourselves out there, and then either by hook or by crook or by hard work, just getting it done and delivering.
Thank you, Matt. I think Jeff Knott has got a question. Jeff.
Yeah, sorry, it's a question for Matt. Your wife gave up work, you said. So what's her role in the... I'm interested to see why you both gave up work. That was all.
Matt, if you could be brief on this, because we do want to involve the other speakers as well.
Absolutely. So she's ex-GP. She's in charge of the employee support side of things. We would see a job as being just one step, but actually it's the support around it. So mentoring, signposting, understanding people's needs, that kind of thing that we'd say about supportive employment. So she is effectively the supportive bit. I'm more the employment bit.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Steve Best has got a question to Tim and to Ben. Is there a list of sectors and or companies that are to be avoided with reasons why? Expanding on the ones that Tim mentioned today. So is there a way, I guess, of knowing what are sound and unsound investments? Maybe that's the question. What do you use as criteria?
Well, let me give a very superficial for now answer, although I think it's a great question. I'd love to talk about it more at the retreat, hopefully. But there are some sectors that in their entirety, we think it makes sense to avoid. So just to give a few, on the one hand, tobacco and alcohol and gambling companies would be instances of that, where we think there's basically so much harm and devastation that comes from those industries that it's just prudent for Christians to avoid those kind of investments in general. On the other hand, the question sort of implies that if we could just distinguish which are the bad sectors from the good sectors, everything would be fine. And that's a misunderstanding. There are an awful lot of companies in sectors that are perfectly fine to invest in that nevertheless have business models that make them bad choices from a Christian values point of view. So just for example, the huge financial crisis that racked the world, much of the Western world at the end of 2008, 2009, thereabouts, was basically brought about by very speculative practices in the mortgage underwriting industry. There's nothing wrong with writing mortgages. In fact, writing mortgages can be a huge blessing. But if it's done in a predatory fashion, that can cause a great deal of harm, as we all witness. So there's a case where the industry sector per se is perfectly fine, but particular business models might be quite predatory.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Right, it's time to move into breakout groups. So do quiz the speakers and anybody else in your little breakout group, and we'll see you again later.